it is important that when you're sitting before the sutta, even though it's a shorter sit period of meditation, if you can continue on sitting while you're listening to the Dhamma talk, it really can become quite fruitful for your practice. Many people ignore the fact that so many individuals attained while listening to the Dhamma. Earlier, during the guided meditation portion, I was saying how samadhi is essential to really tasting the Dhamma, to really attaining the goal of this holy life. Do not make the mistake of thinking that it is only when you are in deep, 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 deep meditation where you can attain samadhi. Because that deep, deep, deep meditation for many people is simply no longer being present to what's happening. But true samadhi allows you to be fully open, even with your eyes open. Interacting with the world, you can still have samadhi as you develop it. But we first need to be able to sit with samadhi to establish a good foundation. But many people, as I mentioned earlier, attained while they were listening to the Dhamma talk, whether it was being present when Dhamma is being taught, preached, discussed, clarified, explained by the Buddha or by someone else, one of his students, repeating the teaching of the Buddha to listeners. That is how Venerable Sariputta, after all, and Venerable Moggallana, among so many others, attained simply by listening to the Dhamma. And while you're listening, if you're completely there, you reach a level where there's such a tremendous, unprecedented trust develop in you. Suddenly everything just quiets down and you drop into samadhi without any effort. And that's where the person develops the Dhamma eye. They see the Dhamma. They become, depends on their level, stream winner or stream enterer on their way to attain full stream winning status, which is the first, or becoming a once returner, a non-returner, or even an arahant. These are not fairy tales, these are real. So whenever you're listening to a Dhamma discourse, approaching it with that, not saying to yourself, oh, I have to sit through another one, or no, there's got to be the real enthusiasm, curiosity. That's genuine curiosity for you to walk from one room of ignorance and into open space of possibilities. And that's what the grand possibility of stream winning is, where the person is no longer the same. They truly have transformed. No longer are they subject to being reborn into the lower realms ever again. So when you're listening to the Dhamma talks, please, even through recordings, because it doesn't make a difference. If you're really there, if your heart is opening up while you're listening to it fully, wonderful things start happening. Now, coming back to the specific sutta today, that we'll be covering. It's a rather different course that we'll be taking today, because I decided to go to the dāna, which are the collections of joyful, inspiringly joyful utterances of the Buddha himself, where he witnessed something happen and he expressed an appropriate sentiment to describe, to capture that moment, which in the form of verses that the bhikkhus later on repeated. And we have covered suttas from the dāna in the earliest days of the SES, or Sutta Exploration Series. We began 4 or 5 years ago. We covered the Bahya Sutta, for example, powerful sutta. So today, for today's discourse, today's sutta, I decided to go and explore a rather unexplained, not properly explained, not well explained event from the life of the Buddha. In fact, erroneously translated, erroneously promulgated, and down the centuries to us, misrepresenting events, unfortunately. That is what this sutta for today, which is the Cunda Sutta from the dāna number 8.5 from the Book of the Eights of dāna, the joyful, inspiringly joyful utterances of the Buddha. This book, again, the dāna, is usually come in the twin form. The other one is Itivuttaka, which was entirely recited by the slave woman in the king's palace. She was also the flower girl. She was responsible to bring in flowers to the harem, to the queen and her, ladies in waiting. Kujuttara, we call her Lady Kujuttara because she attained stream winning and her life changed because she went and listened to the Buddha on her way to the palace with the flowers, which she decided to give away to the Buddha. So that became known as the collection of work called Itivuttaka, which is, this is what, I have heard this type of a thing, which is very similar to Evam Me Suttam, which Venerable Ananda says throughout the suttas. This is what I personally heard. So it's similar to that. So Itivuttaka and dāna go in hand in hand, which are called the twins in a sense, even though they're different books, but they're very old. And many of the bhikkhus had to recite them. Many of the laity had to recite them because they're so captivating. They're so short, concise, precise. And many people attain simply by listening to these verses. So the dāna and Itivuttaka, just like the Dhammapada, Tathagata, Tathagata, Sutta Nipata, they come from the collection, which are called the shorter or kindred discourses, the Khuddaka Nikaya. It stands in line with, Anguttara Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, etc. So dāna is from that. Now, why Cunda? Why is this misunderstood, misrepresented, and erroneously, in fact, taught? When people come in to the Dhamma in one way or the other, interested, etc., or seriously wanting to practice, sooner or later they are hit with the question, how did the Buddha die? Usually the information that is given at that point is wrong. I remember about 30 some years ago, when I approached my earliest teacher, who was the Mahatera. He was a Mahanayaka, in fact. He was the head of all Bhikkhu Sangha within the Western world. An older monk, therefore. And I was surprised and I was somewhat disappointed that the Buddha had to die at the hands of someone who offered him rotten pork meat, dish made out of pork, and not even good meat, not even fresh. From that moment on, I was always, in a sense, disappointed in the, well, basic common sense kicked in and says, how could the Buddha be so wise and still fall for something like that? How could anyone eat rotten meat? You know when the food is spoiled, so why the Buddha would eat that? But that is what I was taught. That is what the literature around that event of the Buddha's death kept saying. To this day, sadly, almost 40 years after that, I still come across individuals in temples, even in digital media and in online resources of the suttas, Pali suttas, mind you, modern so-called translations, well-known sources of suttas, and they still have that same, I can't say lie, because I don't know if they're intentionally doing it, but definitely there is no wisdom there. There's no common sense there. No one has, well, at least they have not done their due diligence to find out what sukaramadava means, which is the term we have in Pali for that meal. So as I was researching some years ago, because it never sat well with me, there was something wrong about it. Intuitively, viscerally, I knew there was something wrong. I didn't know what, but I couldn't doubt my teachers, the sources, the so-called books, the commentaries, and importantly, the beliefs that people had. And almost you could see the invisible head shaking, like how could, So many people shunned pork or pork meat or just meat eating entirely because they were disgusted by what that event did. In a sense, was a cause for the Buddha's death. He ate that, it was poisoned, and the Buddha died because of it. Very simplistic so-called logic, but has nothing to do with reality. And soon I found out what sukara madhava means. Sukara means pork, or more specifically, pig. Madhava means tender, soft, in some cases sweet, delectable. So if you're looking at it in those fashions, and many people were not already talking Pali at the time when these commentators began putting their signature on the Dhamma, unfortunately, you put two and two together and you see, oh, okay, so it's sweet tasting pork meat, and because the Buddha died, therefore it was bad pork meat. It was spoiled, it was poisonous. Especially after the event that took place, because many of these teachers were using the Buddha's own statements after he eats the meal, where he says to Cunda, take this, whatever's left over of it. In fact, don't offer it to anybody else except for me. And once the food is taken by the Buddha, he tells Cunda, the goldsmith, the lay person, take this leftover and throw it somewhere where there's no life, because no one else could eat it. So they use that as a justification for their premise that, if it was not poisoned, then the Buddha would have allowed Cunda to go ahead and offer it to the rest of the bhikkhus who are eating at Cunda's house. Complete nonsense. It doesn't hold ground logically even, because we're going to see today some of the other aspects and the circumstantial evidence that they use at best to make their erroneous conclusions. Cunda was a wealthy son of a goldsmith. In those days, if you were working with gold, that meant you were of a certain echelon of society. To work with gold also meant you were working with gemstones. You were wealthy. In fact, Cunda is known in the other suttas, such as the Anguttara Nikaya, for example, in the Book of the Tens, as a very devout practitioner and wealthy layperson who owned a mango grove, where we will see how the Buddha and his Bhikkhu Sangha were resting. A huge mango grove, a park of mango trees. Each tree would give a lot of mangoes, which equals to a lot of money. And he was also a goldsmith. He dealt with gold. He had gold. So he could afford a good meal. Definitely no rotten meat was going to enter his kitchen. None of his workers and servants, employees, or even slaves would touch such a thing. People ignore this. They never look at it. Now I want to come back to Sukara Madhava. I'm filling in certain areas of, or introducing you for the first time to this, even if you have not thought about what might have killed the Buddha. Did he die a natural death, or did he get poisoned? Because there were many attempts at his life, right? On his life by others. So this is not one of those incidents. There was no nefarious situation, as we will see. And Sukara Madhava, we will find out. Maybe I should leave that for when we get to it. So I don't want to speak too much on this to establish, in a sense, the scene. But basically, it is the Udana 8.5, and from the Pataligamiya Vagga, the section of the villagers of Patali. Again, this is Cunda Sutta, Cunda the goldsmith, or the way I like to also translate it, the Buddha's last meal, the Blessed One's last meal. Let's begin. This is what I personally heard. At one time, the Blessed One was walking on a journey within the Mallan region, along with a large group of the Bhikkhu Sangha, when he arrived at Pava. Once having reached that place, the Blessed One decided to stay for a while in Pava, as he recovered from the long journey in the sanctuary within the mango tree park, owned by Cunda the goldsmith. Then Cunda the goldsmith heard, the Blessed One has been walking on a journey within the Mallan region, along with a large group of the Bhikkhu Sangha, and now he has arrived at Pava. Furthermore, the Blessed One has decided to stay for a while here in Pava, as he recovers from the long journey in the sanctuary within my own mango tree park. Imagine you hear that the Buddha, your teacher, because in the sutta that I mentioned, one of the suttas anyhow, where Cunda comes and asks the Lord Buddha from the numerical discourses, in the Book of the Tens, I think, he's asking some very pertinent questions, and the Buddha gives him instruction on the Dhamma, at the end of which he takes refuge in the triple gem and becomes an upasaka, a really devoted lay Buddhist disciple of the Buddha. So it's his teacher. The Buddha is his teacher. So imagine you hear about the teacher whom you love and you're dedicated to and practicing his teachings. Suddenly you hear that he is come to your town, to your region in India, and not only that, but has picked your own territory, your own land, your own park to go and rest, find refuge there. So you become excited. You're so humbled, you're so glad that the Buddha chose your place, because at this time, the Buddha was already 80 years old. He was very old, and in other suttas, such as the notable my brain just stopped, Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where we covered, I think, for 7 weeks, the longest sutta, one of the longest suttas of the whole Nikayas, where we saw how the Buddha died at the end of that sutta. But so many teachings were there, but we see Cunda there as well from the Digha Nikaya, long discourses. And we see also how the Buddha was struggling to go from one area to the next. So here in the sutta, it just says the Buddha came as he was walking with the other bhikkhus, sanghas, the bhikkhu sangha, and he came to Palava. Well, he was taking a break every few, maybe a mile or so. His back was hurting. He was already very, very frail. So that's why the Buddha just, so people knew that he was, on the verge of, well, he's old. And in those days, 80 years old was really like a super centenarian of modern day, equivalency. Many people died at the age of 40. So let's continue. Thus, on having heard the news of the teacher's arrival, Cunda the goldsmith rushed to his mango grove, where he went and approached the Blessed One. And after paying his respects and worshipping him, he sat to one side. Then the Blessed One instructed, encouraged, and kept guiding Cunda the goldsmith with a deeply inspiring Dhamma talk that left him utterly moved and delighted, with confidence in the teachings that he received from the Blessed One. Afterwards, being thus encouraged and moved with much trusting faith, Cunda the goldsmith addressed the Blessed One by saying, Bhante, I'd like to humbly request the Blessed One and his noble Sangha of bhikkhus to attend tomorrow's meal at my home. May the Blessed Lord please accept my invitation for tomorrow's lunch dāna. And the Blessed One accepted the invitation through his silence. On seeing the Blessed One's acceptance of his invitation for the next day's meal, Cunda the goldsmith arose from his seat and, after paying homage to the Blessed One, circumambulated him while keeping the teacher to his right before he went on his way. It was a rare opportunity to witness the Dhamma being taught. We live at a time where there's so much availability, and which is great. At a time where we have recordings, we have podcasts, we have YouTube channels and other media where there's so much Dhamma. Yes, most of it, leaves a lot to be desired, but there is still a good chunk of genuine Dhamma available for us. So we can become jaded, we take it for granted. But not the people at the time of the Buddha. There were no such resources available. So when a teacher would come to someone's town, would visit, or on their way, on their long journey, it's such a honorable occasion. It's such a great fortune for them to be there, to hear about it. That's why you see so many times in discourses, so in suttas, where people drop what they're doing and they rush to go to a teacher, especially if the teacher happens to be the Buddha, to listen to some Dhamma. So this, I'm saying it because I'm trying to remind you also to never take it for granted. Simply because you have a lot of it, resources for it, does not mean we are truly practicing, or we are really appreciating the beauty and rarity of the Dhamma. That's the danger, that's the risk we run when we have so much of it available. People sometimes say, oh, I'll listen to it, when I have the time, I'll read that section when I have the time. Well, the time will never come unless you put the effort. It will never come unless you take initiative. Because it's your life. It's your understanding. It's your development that is necessary for you to really seek, to gain understanding of, and to really go deep enough in the Dhamma proper by treating it as a gem, as a jewel. I cannot say enough things about that to create that momentum. So, and the Buddha accepted it with his silence. And that is a typical way where the Buddha or some of the Arahants would respond to an offer, an invitation for the next day's meal. Usually there would be a gesture, but the suttas don't elaborate on that. But usually the Buddha would just gesture, but his silence is what tells the person, the inviter, that the Buddha has accepted. Because if he doesn't, then he would have something to say. He would say, for example, we are invited by so-and-so tomorrow. Either find some type of a way to change the dates. We have examples of this in the suttas. But when there is silence, usually it means the Buddha is accepted, unless otherwise indicated. So, we continue. Then throughout the whole night, Cunda the goldsmith, along with his family and servants, kept making the necessary preparations for the lunch meal he was to offer the next morning at his home. Thus, when morning arrived, he had made delectable and healthy dishes and nutritious drinks made ready. He is wealthy, he can afford to. Just to think about the rice. And in those days, they did it the correct way, which was to ferment the rice. To really allow the toxins from the grain to come out, starch and all that. And that takes a long time. That takes several hours. You have to have the ghee to prepare proper rice. And that's only the rice. You have curries, variety of different dishes. So nobody, unless they were poor, somebody of this caliber and wealth and resources was not going to make a 1 or 2 dish meal. So he will go all out, as the saying goes, as the phrase goes, to make it a memorable, nutritious, healthy spread for the lunch dāna. In addition, this is the interesting part coming up, the first interesting part of the sutta. Cunda the goldsmith had obtained exquisitely sweet, delicious, and very expensive truffles. Sukara Madhava. Truffles. Not pork meat. Truffles. Which he had especially prepared for Lord Buddha and the noble Sangha for their lunch, dāna. When it was all ready, he sent word to the Blessed One, Bhante, it is now time. The offering of food is ready. Okay, here we pause for a moment. Sukara means a pig. Madhava means tender. In those days, just as it is now in some parts of the world, when people went hunting for truffles, which, by the way, they're not fungi necessarily, but people still put it in the category classified as rare form of fungi or mushrooms, but they're not mushrooms. But they do grow within the ground, underneath the roots of certain trees at certain times of the year. But they are very unpredictable, and human beings cannot cultivate it per se. So what they do now is they use dogs, usually, because their sense of smell is much stronger than humans. And they've discovered some centuries ago that dogs are really good to detecting. In fact, the truffles are so expensive, depending on the type and the size. If there's white truffle, it's more expensive than black ones. And depending on the season, they will produce a different quality, good or bad. But they would put a nozzle nowadays on the dog's mouth, the snout, so that the dog, because it's so tasty, the dog smells it. And once the dog has dug into the ground to go after the source of the smell, sometimes the dog will bite into it. And the price of the truffle just dropped. It became, you can't sell it. And the dog sometimes would eat it. So people have put nozzles nowadays. They put nozzles so that the dog just can get to it, but can't bite it. So the person who's the dog owner will reach in and grab hold of the truffle. Okay. This was a later discovery. For ages, however, people used to use pigs to go after truffles. In some parts of the world, they still do. I think in some areas of France or Europe, people still do. Because their sense of smell is even, especially when it comes to truffles, is far more acute than a dog's, more reliable. Well, guess what? They knew that in India at the time. And truffles were just as exquisite and valuable and expensive as they are today. They were expensive at the time of the Buddha. They were a rare, you can prepare rare dishes with it. Not every day you could have, not even a king could offer to have, or could have truffle dishes whenever he wanted to. Very expensive. Sukara madhava. If you've ever tasted truffles, if it's prepared well, it can become so soft. And it's also very juicy and it's very sweet. Do you see the big stretch that people went to just because of them misreading and using their own wrong views, beliefs to interpret this? Such a beautiful moment. Here you have a wealthy layperson who's offering the best of the Lord Buddha, and they turned it into a poisonous pork meat. This is how stupid people can be. Completely altering reality to serve their purposes and agendas. And you had developed, vegetarianism and all that also as a result of this in some parts of the world. And when you ask them, or they come to you and say, oh, how could you eat meat? Didn't you know, don't you know that the Buddha died from eating meat, the pork? I've had people say that, both when I was a layman and as a bhikkhu. And no, they were not necessarily all of them in Asia or Asians to begin with. Many of them were Westerners who were tooting the same horn, playing to the same tune of ignorance. So let's move on. And if you have questions, please, you could raise them at the end. Hey, do you notice the last several weeks or months, the suttas, the discourses that we were going over studying, they were far more, deep in a sense, you could say, one could argue, compared to this one, which is very, historical. There's events, there's a series of things that are happening that don't require us to engage in such deep analysis per se. But this is very important because I need this to also be really locked into your minds by removing any wrong views you had or might have in the future, by completely foregoing such conclusions and going back to the source and seeing, oh, because there are certain aspects of the Dhamma, history of the Dhamma, events within the lives of the Buddha that many a times, because we don't know how to approach them, we just put them in a bag, we call it oblivion, and not pay attention to it. No, there's so many lessons to be learned here. Understand and also put it in context and grow our understanding with it. Then, once it was already morning, having put on his robes, and by taking along his alms bowl and outer robe, the Blessed One went and approached the home of Cunda the goldsmith, being accompanied by the noble Bhikkhu Sangha, and sat at his prepared seat. After Cunda the goldsmith and his family paid homage to the teacher by worshipping respectfully with their heads at the Blessed One's feet, the great teacher then addressed Cunda the goldsmith while instructing him. Cunda, you may now serve me, and me alone, that sweet truffle dish. But make sure you serve the Bhikkhu Sangha from the other dishes and drinks which you had prepared. So the Buddha knew. Buddha knew what he was about to eat. Nothing the Buddha did was done in an absent-minded or unawares. Because when a person makes the conclusion that the Buddha ate a bad dish, bad meat, rotten meat of a pig, I still remember my own wrong views based on such teachings that I received early on. That, oh, the Buddha must not have had enough information, or he was not mindful. Do you see where that leads? Do you see what that perpetuates? Doubt, skeptical doubt within the mind of a practitioner. Even within a mind of a common person who just walked off the street and is interested in Buddhism, is not a practitioner yet. That really puts a dent on the possibilities, probabilities of this individual to really go into the Dhamma proper. Why? Because you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't eat anything that is offered to you without first looking at it. So that indicates that there is presence of mindfulness, awareness, common sense in you, the common person. How about the Buddha? If he didn't know what he was eating, then wait a minute. How come he was also called the Buddha, awakened one, liberated, and still missed this very big deal? Not see it coming. Do you see? All that is just mumbo jumbo. All that, those conclusions are wrong. They have no place in the Dhamma. No bhikkhu should dare to bring this story and convolute it and present such a wrong narrative. Because that would be perpetuating a state of wrong view, wrong beliefs, evil beliefs, in fact, miccāditthi, and paves their way to hell. The monks who continue to tell these lies. Because one of the worst things than a lie is to present something without sufficient knowledge or understanding, or having done enough work in researching it. So whatever you're saying, the person is believing because of our status as bhikkhus, as teachers. And now you're responsible for their loss and definitely yours, because you are presenting what is adhamma. So the Buddha just told Cunda, that dish, the truffle, sweet truffle dish you prepared, bring it here. Don't offer it to anyone else. He was not being selfish. He was not going, oh, bring that to me. That's the most expensive dish. I'm going to eat that. No. And we'll see more as we go on. Of course, Bhante, replied Cunda the goldsmith, and he did just as the Blessed One instructed, by serving him the sweet truffle dish. while making sure to serve the remaining Bhikkhu Sangha from the other dishes and drinks which he had prepared. Then, once the meal was over, the Blessed One again addressed Cunda the goldsmith, while instructing him. Now, Cunda, take the rest of whatever was left of the sweet truffle dish you served me, and throw it into a deep hole in the ground. For I declare that I do not see anyone, Cunda, be it in the realms of devas, of manas, even of brahmas, let alone within the population of recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins, of any royals and rulers, as well as of common folk, anyone who could be capable of digesting that meal, except for the Tathagata, and no one else but the Tathagata. Of course, Bhante, said Cunda the goldsmith, as he rushed out with the leftover portion of the sweet truffle dish. And after throwing it into a deep hole, he quickly returned to the Blessed One, as he again paid his respects by worshipping the great teacher. Then, after he had gone and sat to one side, the Blessed One kept teaching the Dhamma to Cunda the goldsmith and to the members of his household. Thus, after the Blessed One instructed, encouraged, stirred, and inspiringly guided Cunda the goldsmith with a deeply inspiring Dhamma talk that left him utterly moved and delighted with confidence in the teachings, he arose from his seat and left. Makes sense so far, the event. Then, not long after having eaten the meal offered to him by Cunda, the Blessed One began experiencing excruciating stomach and severe intestinal pain. Soon, he was having symptoms of dysentery and bloody diarrhea, along with terribly agonizing feelings that could have easily and quickly killed a person had they occurred to anyone else. However, the Blessed One kept enduring all that agonizing pain, while remaining unshakable and untroubled, fully observant with his ever-present state of mindfulness and full awareness, sati and sampajanya. It's easy for us to read. If you read the word or words, toothache, headache, some type of a pain, some difficult, suffering causing a situation for someone in words, or you hear about it, it's not the same as you undergoing it. So when we read these, it might not register until it happens to us. I say this because in a society that we are today, there's a lot more apathy than empathy. We talk about empathy, but we don't live it. We really don't know what it is in many cases, unless it hits home for us, unless it happens to our flesh, our skin, we feel it. The toothache is your toothache, and now you want to die. That's how bad it gets. Or intestinal pain, bellyache, some ache. The first thing that goes out the window is the calmness of mind. So when we read these words of Lord Buddha, still, despite all these experiences and feelings of agony undergoing, he doesn't allow his mind to become troubled. That takes control. That takes tremendous willingness and drive and power, energy, to see it for what's happening and not allow the mind to be polluted by that, because the body is trying so hard to overwhelm the mind. Now, the pain might be terrible or might not. Sometimes, even if it's a small fraction of such a painful, agonizing situation, feeling, people give up more so than they could have handled, sooner than they could have handled, rather. Why? Because the mind gives in. Mind says, oh, this is terrible. I can't. So now they talk themselves into chaos. There's agitation. That is our prerogative to allow or not. So many people say, well, I can't handle that, so the Buddha can't, so or could, so I'm don't ask me to be able to. Why not? You have a body just like the Buddha does. You experience pain just like the Buddha did. And you can experience unshakability with willpower, patience, tolerance, acceptance, knowing that you're doing everything you can. But the pain is there, yes, but it's not a cause for us to, start flailing our arms and saying, oh, all hell's broken loose, so there's nothing we can do, you give up. No. Easier said than done. Yes, no one's denying that. But it is practice that is put into practice. All your meditation, all your mindfulness practice of reaching a mind state where you're not allowing it to become troubled and agitated, that's the payoff at that moment. Because once you lose control of the mind, once everything goes berserk, you're gone. You're gone. You are in the hands of Mara. So the text says, however, the Blessed One kept enduring all that agonizing pain, while remaining unshakable and untroubled, fully observant with his ever-present state of mindfulness and full awareness. Then the Blessed One spoke these words to the Venerable Ananda. Come, Ananda, let us walk now towards Kusinara. Yes, Bhante, replied the Venerable Ananda. And here we have the first group of verses of this sutta. It doesn't matter who said it, but most probably it wasn't the Buddha. Probably it was later commentators who were very much moved by the story, by the scenery in their mind. They may have weaved these verses stemming from the suttas, or it might have been a few verses offered by Venerable Ananda, which later on became embellished, or the whole thing was by Venerable Ananda or one of his students who was witnessing this. So the verses go like this, or this is what they say. It was the food offered by Cunda the goldsmith, which after having consumed, the constantly unfailing and stable sage became suddenly ill, with terrible agony ravaging his body. Pain that could have easily killed the person, had it been anyone else, except for him, that is. It was right after he finished eating it, the sweet truffle dish offered to the great teacher, that this terrible sickness arose in him. Yet, unagitated and utterly unshaken, he still remains through it all. The master, even though he still keeps purging, he has the determined strength to say, the city of Kusinara will be our next destination. Let us now all go there, Ananda, without any delay. So you see, even from the verses, you can tell people are making conclusions, because your Bhante, your teacher, was well, relatively, when he went to the lunch dāna. And now he is going to the bathroom and it's blood coming out of him. He's losing his energy, whatever energy he had left, moment to moment. And you're seeing him physically, but the mind, the eyes are intact. But you nevertheless are feeling horrible. So, as is the case today, so was it back then, where people, unawakened individuals that is, will look for a reason, will look for a cause. Why did this happen? And completely avoid the fact that the Buddha was already at the tail end of his life. But you want to find a quick fix, a person to blame. And guess where the blame would go? The meal. That's why in the verses you see, it was after him eating that truffle dish that the Buddha became like this. He became sick because of the meal, therefore. Who offered it? Ah, Cunda. Do you see? This is truly, when the person looks for causes to explain their discomfort with the fact. So now we go back to the text. Then, to take some rest while on the way, the Blessed One left the path and went to sit under a tree and addressed the Venerable Ananda by saying, Ananda, take my outer robe, fold it into four, and spread it on the ground for me to rest a bit, for I am worn out and exhausted. I will sit down here and rest for a while. Yes, Bhante, said the Venerable Ananda, who then folded the Blessed One's outer robe into four, and the master sat down to rest a bit on the prepared seat. We didn't walk around with mattresses or pillows as bhikkhus. So the outer robe usually is a little bit thicker material. And that would be the one that's the third robe, by the way, I referred to. Every time the bhikkhus would go out for Pindapada in the morning, they would make sure that they have all three, just in case something might happen and they're out there in the cold or they're caught somewhere and they need to protect themselves, spend the night. They need to have their mattress with them, their covers with them. That was the outer robe's job also. So the way they would do it, they would fold it into four so it becomes thicker. Sometimes it would serve as even as a portion of it as a pillow too. Anyhow, not long after, the Blessed One again addressed the Venerable Ananda by saying, Ananda, I am thirsty. Please go and bring me some drinking water. I wish to get a sip of water to quench my thirst. But once this was spoken, the Venerable Ananda turned and said this to the Blessed One. Bhante, just earlier we saw 500 ox-driven carts pass us by over the small creek. And whatever drinkable water there was, I'm sure it has all become muddied, now utterly undrinkable, for it must have been churned up by all those hundreds of wheels being pulled through, and the animals crossing over it, making it dirty and totally unfit to drink. However, Bhante, the tiny river Kukuta is not that far away. Its fresh and clean water is cool and delicious, and totally drinkable as it is always clean. Plus, its banks are nicely shaded and beautiful, truly a delightful place to take some rest. Once there, the Blessed One can drink his fill of its clean and cool, delicious waters, while at the same time washing and cooling off his tired limbs. Imagine you were there. What would you do? Would you say what Venerable Ananda did and said? In his mind, probably, he's convinced of his logic. But at the cost of what? Ananda is simply saying, I know better than you, Bhante. My conclusions are more accurate. He's not saying, Bhante, you are wrong. He's not flat out saying, no, Bhante, but he's saying it in many other ways. Those same feelings are coming through. And he's using his own common sense. Oh, did you see, Bhante? You didn't see? So many carts, so many oxen walked through, and they were probably pooping in the water as they passed through, their hooves and the mud. Oh, it's all dirty. Humility is often not spoken, not addressed. Its importance, I mean, in this path. Not just this path, any spiritual path, any discipline requiring path. We need to have humility if you have individuals working for you, under you in a company or your workplace, who are without humility, sooner or later they're going to get fired. Or if they are your bosses, supervisors, you will come to hate them. You will not want to go to work for them. So we all know the value of humility, but when it comes to us, especially in the context of teacher-student, many of us don't even want to be called that because we see it as a subordinate status. Already, there's no humility. It's out the window. There's none. So humility is an absolute must to be there in the repertoire, in the resume, if you will, of any kind of a practitioner. But here we see a human moment where you would go, come on, Venerable Ananda, how could you? This is the Buddha. He must have his reasons. You think he doesn't know? How many times have you been in situations where you thought, well, I know better than the teacher. I'll be respectful, but now when it comes to this, I am in the right. The teacher is in the wrong. There's no difference between us doing that and Venerable Ananda refusing to get some water for the Buddha who is thirsty. But for the second time, the Blessed One said to the Venerable Ananda, Ananda, I am thirsty. Please go and bring me some drinking water. I wish to get a sip of water to quench my thirst. And for a second time, the Venerable Ananda replied by saying to the Blessed One, Bhante, just earlier we saw 500 ox-driven carts pass us by all over the creek. And whatever drinkable water there was, I'm sure it has all become muddied, now utterly undrinkable, for it must have been churned up by all those hundreds of wheels being pulled through and the animals crossing over it, making it dirty and totally unfit to drink. However, Bhante, the tiny river Kuta is not that far away. Its fresh and clean water is cool and delicious, and totally drinkable as it always clean. Plus, its banks are nicely shaded and beautiful, truly a delightful place to take some rest. Once there, the Blessed One can drink his fill of its clean and cool, delicious waters, while at the same time washing and cooling off his tired limbs. So he repeats the whole thing. Then once this was said for the third time, the Blessed One repeated to the Venerable Ananda, excuse me, Ananda, I am thirsty. Please go and bring me some drinking water. I wish to get a sip of water to quench my thirst. This time the Venerable Ananda replied by saying to the Blessed One, Yes, Bhante, as you wish. And he took the bowl to the nearby creek to fetch some water for the Blessed One. You can tell if a person resists once and then second time as well. And there was a rule. If the Buddha asked 3 times and you didn't respond, there would be trouble. The Buddha would not, cause anything to happen, but there would be trouble for you because you disrespected the Buddha. So even Ananda knew that. So you can tell as he's saying, yes, Bhante, most probably there was some passive-aggressive behavior there. He was doing it in spite of himself. You can just imagine him walking to the creek and saying, see, I'm gonna go and get him some muddy water. I mean, that's what he's asking for. That's what I'll get him. He's simply being stubborn. That's what his denial was saying about his behavior. Now, as the Venerable Ananda approached its waters, the creek, he saw how the creek had indeed become dirty and sullied, muddy and all churned up by the crossing of all those animals and the hundreds of carts they dragged behind. However, as he placed the alms bowl into the water, suddenly, to his utter dismay, the water immediately turned clear, becoming pure and transparent and completely drinkable. Then it occurred to the Venerable Ananda, well, This is so wonderful indeed. How marvelous and truly lovely this is. For right before my eyes, I am seeing the miraculous powers of the Tathagata. His mighty psychic powers are truly unimaginable. Although the water in this creek had indeed been totally dirty, stirred up and sullied, muddy and all churned up by the crossing of all those animals and the hundreds of carts they dragged behind, yet the very instant I placed the alms bowl into the water, suddenly, to my utter dismay, the water immediately turned clear, pure, transparent, and completely drinkable. When you look at this statement or expression, exclamation by Venerable Ananda in being confronted with this miracle that took place in front of his eyes, did you hear any apologies? Did you see any regret or remorse on his part? This is what we do often. We look at whatever is more pronounced, at least on the surface, but we refuse to look at our own contribution to, well, following through with ignorance. We look for other things, other supplemental things that can get the focus away from us and the fact that we were behaving in a non-exemplary way, to say the least. And that's what Venerable Ananda is doing. He's not taking ownership of his behavior. He refused to get water to his teacher. If you had a pet and your pet comes over and he gestures to you, you know from the pet's behavior that they're thirsty. You don't go denying the pet to get their water, especially someone who's so dehydrated. He has had dysentery and terrible bloody diarrhea all morning, all day. He doesn't have water. When you have diarrhea, you make sure at the very least you have water. Your electrolytes are gone. So he should have known better. But he's not even focusing on that. See, his focus is, oh, how miraculous! Completely avoiding the fact that he didn't get the Buddha what he needed the moment he said it. And this was actually later on to his detriment. In the first council, when he told the other bhikkhus, the arahants, about this, they scolded him severely, even though he was an arahant. They said, how could you? You should have known better. But he defended himself. Intricacies of behavior. Then, taking the bowl full of fresh, clean water with him, he quickly went back, carrying it to the Blessed One. And as he handed it to the teacher, the Venerable Ananda exclaimed with delight, Bhante, it was so wonderful indeed. How marvelous and truly lovely this is. For right before my eyes, I saw the miraculous powers of the Tathagata, witnessing his mighty psychic powers that are truly unimaginable. Because although the water in this creek had indeed been totally dirty, stirred up and sullied, muddy and all churned up by the crossing of all those animals and the, hundreds of carts they dragged behind, yet the very instant I placed the alms bowl into the water, suddenly, to my utter dismay, the water immediately turned clear, pure, transparent, and completely drinkable. So drink, blessed Lord, drink the clean, fresh water, O Sugata. And the Blessed One drank the clean and fresh water from the bowl, quenching his thirst. O Sugata is a term for the Buddha, it's an accolade, is a title. Later, being accompanied by the Bhikkhu Sangha, the Blessed One continued on his journey towards the tiny river Kukuta. And on reaching it, they took their rest under the mango grove on its bank, as the Blessed One went into the river, where he drank its clean water, while bathing and refreshing himself in it. Once out of the water, the Blessed One addressed the Venerable Chundaka by instructing, Come now, Chundaka, please take my outer robe and fold it into four, so that I can lie down and rest for a while. I am wearied and tired. I just need to lie down. Do you see why this is an important sutta? We often forget the humanity of the Buddha. And that's not good. It doesn't serve us. Because oftentimes we place the Buddha up there somewhere. We turn him into a being, other being, a super normal, super something out there, separate from my reality here as a human being, who has to undergo tiredness, exhaustion, pain, suffering, agony. So we remove the Buddha completely from the human condition. But how could we do that? He was the only teacher that spoke on suffering. How could you speak on suffering without having known it firsthand, fully? Every single painful experience or pleasurable experience that we have undergone or will undergo or are undergoing, the Buddha had experienced already. So he knew exactly what constitutes pleasurable feeling, but especially painful one as well. That's why you can teach dukkha. So bear that in mind. So Chundaka, Venerable Chundaka, the Bhikkhu, was asked by the Buddha to prepare the robes and put him on the ground. Yes, Bhante, of course, replied the Venerable Chundaka as he quickly prepared a resting area for the Blessed One by folding the teacher's outer robe into 4. Once this was done, the Blessed One was able to rest by laying down on his right side in the lion's posture, mindfully and with full awareness, as he crossed one leg over the other, having already determined in his mind the length of time he was to rest, while knowing full well when to rise up. And that is what we are always advised. We don't go just jump into bed and just, get comfy and cozy in with a pillow and just say, oh, and you go ahead and snore. Before you even shut your eye, you are determining the length of time you will be spending there. You're responsible, you're mindful of the body's position, your elbows, your hands, while you're there in privacy in your own bed. Because if not, then what's the difference between us and a Puthujjana? So there is restraint even in sleep. The Buddha did not say, don't sleep. Necessary time for the body to rest, that is. But when you do that, determine how long you will be sleeping. The Buddha never encouraged, there's statements of him scolding individuals who would go and sleep a little bit longer. When they wake up, just a little bit longer. There's no sati, there's no awareness. There's avijja, there's delusion, there's moha. But the rest is taken, the person does rest, but the moment and it's also good for the mind to have that alarm clock working in the mind, telling yourself, I will wake up at 6 a.m., or I will wake up at 5:35 a.m., or even in the afternoon when you really, really, really are tired and you need to rest. Okay, don't just go open-endedly and say, okay, I'm going to sleep and I'll wake up whenever I wake up. No. Bhikkhus don't do that. The good practitioner does not do that. You tell yourself, okay, I will sleep for 20 minutes. I will wake up at, 21 past the hour, for example. And it's a wonderful game you can play with yourself because you wake up, even if it's 5 minutes, I've tried it. The mind has nothing to worry about because it knows these 5 minutes are mine. I'm going to rest. And you go deep into rest and you wake up refreshed. So you don't see any place in the suttas, in the thousands of suttas, where somebody comes and nudges the Buddha, Bhante, blessed Lord, time for you to wake up. That never happens. Never happens. I'm recalling certain incidents from my life with certain teachers where I was designated the person who would go and wake up the teacher as well as all the retreatants. This happened in Bali, first time I was there. And I was told to wake up at 5 and wake everyone up. So everyone is ready. Actually, even before 5, I think it was like wake up before 5, like 4:50, something like that. And then go and announce by ringing a bell, a chime, something like that, a gong. And I would go around the whole area, and it was a huge area. And the bhikkhu at the time, he was living in his own cottage area, so it was far away. So I had to walk there, but make sure that I do it gently because it's, as a teacher. So it would be interesting, the reaction of that person and how the Buddha was. I would see the person saying, okay, go away, and still sleep, which was very funny. Very funny. Here is his student trying to wake him up in pitch blackness, and he wants to get some more shut-eye. Meanwhile, the students over there are rushing to get ready to go to the Dhamma hall. We have to check. Simply because we have a certain position or role we're playing, we don't let it get to our head that we are an exception somehow. The Buddha was a perfect example of how a bhikkhu should behave, should speak, should move. That still stands. Nowhere in the centuries as they pass did those rules become, if you want to wake up. No. Because if that person had some object, he would have thrown it at me. Because one time I remember I did it 3 times because I went back and he had still been sleeping. He didn't wake up. So I went back again. Meanwhile, everyone is in the Dhamma hall. Well, things for us not to do. That's why I'm sharing these stories, so we're aware. It's not all rosy-colored and things and wishful thinking. That's why I give you inside scoops sometimes too, from my own living experiences when I was a layman. So we identify these things and we don't worship the teacher at all, because that was only one teacher, by the way, demonstrating and behaving in not such a exemplary way, shall we say. Anyhow, meanwhile, the Venerable Cundaka sat down right there in front, close to the Blessed One, while the great teacher rested. So Venerable Cundaka folded the robes, laid it down respectfully, and the Blessed One slid down and just went to, started resting, took a nap. And then this is such a beautiful scene where you have the bhikkhu who is the student. We don't know the age of Venerable Cundaka. He might have been very old, because Venerable Ananda was the same age as the Buddha, so 80. But in this case, we don't know his Venerable Cundaka's age, but look how beautiful it is. He's sitting there as if he's keeping watch. He's protecting the teacher. There's so much love there. And now we get the second set of verses spoken about this event. Probably it was from Venerable Cundaka, we don't know. The Buddha, gone to the tiny river Kukuta, with water so fresh and clear, delightfully refreshing too. The Master, being so visibly exhausted and wearied, yet so very alert and mindful, went to the river, plunging into it. The Tathagata is indeed matchless, for he remains unrivaled, the incomparable throughout the entirety of existence. Drinking from it and bathing his tired body in those cool waters, the great teacher came, the caravan leader, guiding and walking in front of all the bhikkhus, leading them all while standing in their middle, the mighty giant, the great teacher, the Blessed One himself of the present Dhamma dispensation. He walked towards the mango grove, and by addressing this bhikkhu Cundaka, spoke the words, "Fold my robe into four and spread it on the ground, so I may lay down for a bit and get some rest." Moved by the immediacy of those heartfelt words of the self-developed and perfected one himself, Cunda then quickly folded the Blessed One's robe into four and laid it down upon the ground with utmost care and attention. And as the master laid down to rest his broken and tired body, Cunda could not help but stay very close. In stillness he sat with absolute dedication by the great sage's side, right there in front, ever so quietly. So much love there. Protection as well. Afterwards, having risen from his rest, the Blessed One spoke these words while addressing the Venerable Ananda once more. Ananda, it may indeed so happen that some will start blaming or accusing the householder Cunda, the goldsmith. Or even worse, he might start feeling remorse and go on blaming or accusing himself while reflecting. It was all because of you, Cunda. You are the one who brought about this terrible debacle. Cunda, may you be cursed, for it was the food that you offered to the Tathagata which ended up killing the teacher. As he came to your home in acceptance of your offering, eating his very last alms food given to him by your very hands. And now he is gone forever, having entered final nibbana so soon, and all because of you. Now, Ananda, if any such remorseful thoughts arise within Cunda the goldsmith or in others who might want to accuse or blame him for this, then you must quickly remedy the situation by explaining to them how, in fact, the opposite is really the case. You must clarify the matter to them by saying, "You are quite fortunate, unbelievably fortunate, oh dear Cunda. After all, Cunda, you happen to be the one who offered the Tathagata his very last meal. A truly magnificent and uniquely special honor indeed. For the teacher came to your home in acceptance of your offering of a meal, eating his very last alms food that was given to him by your very hands. And only afterwards the Tathagata entered final nibbana." People talk about the Buddha's compassion. Look how compassionate he is. He's thinking ahead, as he always had done. But this time in relation to Cunda and what people might do, might say, might accuse him of. So the Buddha preemptively is addressing that because he knew that this was about to happen. Because some of the bhikkhus, as we saw earlier in the verse section, they were already blaming Cunda for giving that meal, even though they knew what type of a food it was. Imagine thousands of years later, we, on hearing about the cause of the Buddha's death, oh, the rotten, meat, or the pig pork meat, basically pork, we already have certain feelings toward Cunda. I know I did when I first heard the story. I was angry at Cunda as a 20-year-old. How could you? How could you? You must have been working for the other side. You must have been, I don't know, did the Jains hire you? Or you must have had a different, agenda. All these nonsensical thoughts. That's why I meant, if you have a little information, it's worse than no information. So he knew that people will be, dictated by their own strong emotions, agitation. They will look for someone to blame, and Cunda was the one. After all, he served the last meal of the Buddha with his own hands. So he's the culprit. He's the one. He is to blame. And the Buddha is saying, no, 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 no. And Ananda, I'm having you be the one, designating you as the person who needs to go and clarify this whenever it happens. Spread the word, Ananda. Because Cunda was in a very, very fortunate state to be the last one to offer a meal to the Tathagata, and we're going to see why. Now remember this, O Cunda, for I have heard this myself from the Blessed One's own lips. So the Buddha is saying to Ananda, this is what you should say. So Ananda later on, when he's going to see, not in this sutta, to speak to Cunda, because Cunda will blame himself, for sure. Because he still doesn't know all these things that have been happening to the Buddha ever since the Buddha left his house, his lunch dāna. So he's having those totally different perspective on how beautiful it went. He doesn't know the pain the Buddha's in. But once he does find out, he will be really remorseful, unjustifiably. And that's why Venerable Ananda is being told what to say to both Cunda as well as others. There happen to be two unique offerings of alms food that are identical in their consequent weight and fruits, where each of these meals offered bear equal results, while at the same time being the highest and far above any other gifts of alms food offered by anyone else. There's two kinds of alms food, the Buddha is saying. They're equal in value, extremely high, the highest when it comes to food offerings. Nothing could match them. And what are these two? The very first offering of alms food that is made to the Tathagata just before he attains to perfect awakening and becomes the supremely and fully self-awakened Buddha, whereby he realizes Nibbana supreme. That's the first. And the second one is the very last meal that is offered to the Tathagata right before he enters the final Nibbana element. These two. These are therefore the two uniquely supreme and singular offerings of alms food that can be made, wherein both gifts of a meal are truly identical in their consequent weight and fruit, where each meal offered bears equal results, while at the same time being the highest and far above any other gifts of alms food ever offered by anyone else. Therefore, bring your attention to these facts about the gift of alms food you provided, as I have heard it in the very presence of the Blessed One himself. Our friend Cunda the Goldsmith has committed such an exceptionally and good intentional action, which has now accrued for him the certainty of a very long and healthy life. Our friend Cunda the Goldsmith has committed such an exceptionally good intentional action, which has now accrued for him the certainty of being beautiful and experiencing beauty throughout life. Our friend Cunda the Goldsmith has now committed such an exceptionally good intentional action, kamma, which has now accrued for him the certainty of a happiness throughout life. Our friend Cunda the Goldsmith has now committed such an exceptionally good intentional action, which has now accrued for him the certainty of having renown and fame throughout life. Our friend Cunda the Goldsmith has now committed such an exceptionally good intentional action, which has now accrued for him the certainty of a heavenly birth. Our friend Cunda the Goldsmith has now committed such an exceptionally good intentional action, which has now accrued for him the certainty of having sovereignty over others in life. Therefore, Ananda, if any remorseful thoughts were to occur within Cunda the goldsmith, then you must drive them out by clarifying the matter in this way. So that is the Buddha's directive. But isn't it surprising or astonishing the fact that despite the categorically clear, the definitive explanation that the Buddha gave in the suttas, in the Udana, one of the earliest collection of suttas, discourses, yet human beings have elected to ignore it completely. I mean, how can you be more obvious, matter of fact, than these statements made by the Buddha himself? These were not added later, by the way, because they're in the Udana. Some other suttas in some other collections are extra additions and tweaked, but not this one. This comes from the earliest days of the sasana, the dispensation. But yet, people still went ahead and turned Cunda into a villain, turned him into a killer, basically, an assassin of the Buddha. So we have to really put an effort not to take things without doing our due diligence to understand the what, where, and why, and how. Instead of believing someone else's words, I did not believe my Mahatera teacher's words. I knew it didn't sit well with me. I knew I kept coming back to this event. It didn't make sense. After some time, I had to go and do some digging. And I'm glad to say some people in the world, including lay people, have been, I know there was a Sri Lankan American, someone who had immigrated to the US from Sri Lanka, even wrote a book on this, disclosing this. He did his own research, and guess what? It was the same conclusion. Truffles, not poisoned pork. But it goes far beyond that. It touches on the ignorance that people have. Then, while acknowledging the significance of this event, the Blessed One made the following inspiringly joyful utterance by saying, by giving away and sharing what is valuable and dear, for such an open-handed person, favorably good and beneficial merits keep on increasing and thus continuously grow. With restraint as the lead, steering one to keep moving straight ahead, no hatred or animosity could ever arise or manifest. For the one developed in skillful behavior keeps giving up all that is harmful and evil. Then the very fires of passions, hatred, and delusion, in all their defiling attributes, all come to cease and thus get fully quenched. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. There you have it. Now you know. Now no one can fool you. Now no one can persuade you that the Buddha died because he ate meat or bad meat. We heard it from the Buddha's own mouth. By the way, in case you're wondering, or if you don't know, this part, in reference to the two alms meals or alms food that are offered, one right before the Buddha becomes the Buddha, when he's striving still as a bodhisattva, trying to attain full awakening. Whoever offers him the meal, which after eating which he goes and feels refreshed, rejuvenated, nourished, and goes and makes the determination to sit under the Bodhi tree, never to move, never to budge until full awakening has been attained. That meal, which the Buddha received from Lady Sujata, the milk rice from a cowherd, a woman, a young girl, who saw Siddhartha, saw how emaciated he was. So she offered him her meal that she had brought with her, milk rice. You can imagine how delicious or nourishing of a fuel that was for the Buddha, after accepting which he went and sat under the tree. That meal is the first meal, that the alms food that the Buddha mentioned at the end of this sutta. And the second one was the one that we covered today, which was the meal that the Tathagata or the Buddha eats as his very last, prior to attaining full, final awakening, where the aggregates come apart, and that's the end. There's no more becoming. He doesn't go somewhere. He doesn't. That's it. It's like the fire that gets extinguished. Where did the fire go? East? West? Did it implode into the candle, into the oil lamp? Where? Where did it go? We find such questions to be idiotic because we all accept extinct. It's extinction. That's another definition, synonym for nibbana. We practice to end rebirth completely. That's the whole point. Because when you have birth, you have suffering, as we covered during the past several weeks with the Mahatanha Sankhya Sutta, which was delving deeper into dependent arising principles, basic culminating in the deathless, but pointing how it's all because of birth. But what leads us to birth, that's the issue. So the whole point is to end the cycle of birth. So a society where it celebrates birth, yet wants to somehow eliminate suffering, is an idiotic society. Unwise thinkers from which we have to separate ourselves. And that's what the Dhamma is. Even though people have made it into something else, which is another form of some other religions, where the Buddha is waiting in some realm over there. If you repeat his name, you're going to end up being born in that realm over there, where they're waiting for you with the arahants. These are all the conclusions of non-practicing idiots, having nothing to do with the Dhamma. So, and it's important on the side note, because this question does come up, where when one offers something, they need to offer it with their own hand, with their own hands, with themselves. When you have the means to it, when you're physically there, because there are situations where people are there, but they don't feel comfortable or they don't want to do it themselves, so they have somebody else do it. I've seen this with sometimes parents giving, let's say, robes to a child, and the child offers it to the bhikkhus. Even though the child might be your own child, but it's different. You have to be alive when you're offering it, and the highest rewards will come when you are the one who is offering it yourself with your own hands, especially in terms of the meal, for example. So again, when the situation allows, if you're on the other side of the planet, if you are, there over there in the top of the mountain and you can't go up there for some reason, that's totally fine. The intention is the primary factor to be considered. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. None? I think it's a lovely sutta, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. Yes? Okay, for some reason we can't hear you, Hataka. Something is blocking it.
Okay,
Oh, yes, good, very good.
good. It's just my observation. My years of pilgrimage to India at both Kushinara and also in Bodh Gaya, I couldn't recall going to Chunda's. Uh, is there a stupa or a place where they venerate him? I'm sure there is, but I couldn't recall one. Whereas Lady Sujata's is very celebrated. In Bodh Gaya, there is like a huge temple that is visited by a lot of Indian, mostly Indian, and then a stupa, a huge stupa size of a small football field. So she was very celebrated in Bodh Gaya, maybe because of geographical reason or something. So yes, so that was one of my observation. And second, I think this is also part of the Maha Parinibbana Sutta. Is it one of the section? Yes, and going to Vaishali and Kushinara, it was very spectacular because you go through all the sites where Buddha crossed the river, where Buddha has one of his alms bowls placed in a mount. Was it in a mount or a stupa? And then all the way to the sala trees. So it was very real that you are stepping onto his foots and listening to the stories. So it's very wonderful to do that. It's just an observation. It's not a question.
Thank you for sharing those observations, and especially the first one in regards to Lady Sujata's stupa. I remember being there and seeing the stupa, touching it, and walking the field, the rice paddies, and getting to a small, what you might call a small temple, but it was more like a shrine that people had constructed of Lady Sujata, and that was the place where the giving of the milk rice, they say, happened. We don't know, of course, if that was exactly the place, but over the centuries, it was a nice shaded area, which we highly appreciated because it was very hot. So we weren't arguing, we weren't debating as to whether this is the place or not, but the stupa was where her remains were placed. But interestingly enough, I also did not see Chunda's. That's always seen, and that's another reason why I wanted to do this sutta today. Even though it's different than other suttas that we've covered, it doesn't go into in-depth Dhamma, but definitely, as you saw, definitely there is Dhamma in it. Okay? A lot of Dhamma here. And the human element is loud and clear. Nevertheless, this also has become a dark episode in the Buddha Sasana where we always look down, we just look away when it comes to Chunda. We feel regretful or remorseful that he existed, let alone to discuss the alms food, because we want to avoid, we want to shun, we want to ignore that last meal because it's so embarrassing. I mean, come on. He died from an alms food offering. But if you are being given that set of wrong information for centuries, How could you not make that deduction, that conclusion yourself? Or how would you not feel that? So I totally understand lay people's reaction or practitioners' reaction towards Cunda. Now, every time I see truffles, guess who I think of? Yes, Venerable Cunda offering his most delicious, most exquisite meal, the Lord Buddha. Expensive meal. And it also reminds me of the time when my dad, we weren't, I mentioned we weren't wealthy by any means. We weren't even middle class. We were poor. But every once in a while, my dad had friends who were taxi drivers, and they would go across countries, like this is in Lebanon. So every once in a while, my dad would come home. Once every blue moon, he would come home with a bag, and he would say, "This is special. This is special." And I remember the first time I saw, I'd never seen truffles. And he brought, I remember, like black truffles. And so his friends, the taxi drivers, sometimes I guess they would owe him money or service. He would, have done something like cut their hair for months, and he wouldn't charge them. So they would, just to repay him, they would bring a bag of truffles. Again, expensive. And my dad would say, my mom would just shun it. She would say, this is terrible. My siblings would do the same, and I would be curious. I would smell it, and I would say, what is this? Is weird. Is this a sponge? What is this? And my dad would prepare it in different ways. Sometimes he would make omelets with it. Sometimes he would make like on a barbecue. And then he would have different variations of flavor. I remember a few times I tried it, but I didn't like it because I didn't have appreciation for it. But I definitely saw when in my understanding of Sukara Madhava as to what this meant, and in my dad's behavior, he would shake his head and he said, "You fools, you don't understand the value of this thing. People would pay good money to get this, and you're pushing it aside and saying, what is this? You're having us eat." Wrong information. So yes, so I hope this is removing those wrong pieces of information from your mind and from your psyche, and now you have a different appreciation altogether, and beauty is added more so onto the life of the Buddha, especially the last portion of his life, which, by the way, as you said, as I also mentioned in the talk today, it is there in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta as well. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, let us transfer.
Sorry. Thank you, Bhante. Sorry.
No worries.
I've just wondered why. Something I've wondered is why the Buddha kept that for himself.
Mm-hmm. Remember in the sutta, the Buddha is saying clearly, nobody other than the Tathagata can ingest, can put this in his mouth. Nobody other than the Buddha, the Tathagata. Because we still, we often don't have enough appreciation of the significance of the Tathagata. We look at his life and we see him in human form. We say, this is in conjunction with what I was saying. This doesn't go contrary to what I was saying earlier, where we have erroneously placed him on this high pedestal of untouchability, of supernormal, superhuman things. This doesn't contradict what I said there. The significance of the Tathagata, however, has to be appreciated. This is not a common occurrence. He is not like other beings. Brahma gods are nothing. That's why they would bow to him. It's when I heard the fact that you cannot have two Buddhas at the same time period in the universe, in the cosmos, in existence, in any kind of a universe at the same time, you cannot have that. I had to scratch my head. I was like, why not? That would be wonderful. Another part of the universe has another Buddha, which later on Mahayanists and Vajrayanists made all that up. It's impossible. Existence would simply be torn into bits. The power of the Tathagata is not appreciated. Of course, we do have examples as to what this could entail or what it entails. In the same Mahaparinibbana Sutta, we have the incident where Mara comes and says to the Buddha, this is after the Buddha addresses Ananda before this water episode, him refusing to fetch water for the Buddha. For 16 times, the Buddha brings up to Ananda, tries to remind him anyhow, that if someone who has attained perfection in the 4 right efforts, not just 4 right efforts, but the Iddhipada, specifically the basis for spiritual success and psychic abilities, someone who has reached the epitome of that development, maturity, full, meaning a Tathagata, if he desires to, if he wants to, then he can remain for the end, all the way to the fullest lifespan. And the fullest lifespan was 100 years. Okay, or close to 100 years, maybe 120 years. Even though I said earlier that majority of people, however, would not reach 40 years. But the full lifespan was to be considered usually inaccessible. However, a person who has attained the 4 bases of spiritual success and psychic abilities, the Iddhipada, if he is being asked, however, if he does not agree the first time, the second time, and then by the 3rd time, he would have to agree to stay the full length of time. So the Buddha, for 16 times over, he made that statement to Venerable Ananda. And 16 times, Venerable Ananda missed that opportunity. He didn't ask, oh, Bhante, please stay for the long haul, for the full extent. Now, over time, people have made that into a full eon. To stay, I was thinking, oh, wow, that means if the Buddha had been asked by Venerable Ananda, then he would still be alive somewhere in the world. How cool is that? Oh, he didn't. That's wishful thinking with the eon. An eon is a very, very, very long time. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of years. So, when the Buddha, the last time, the 16th time, made this, dropped this hint, basically. We covered this in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta several years ago. When Ananda did not respond, and some people that say, oh, because Mara blocked his view, he was completely taken somewhere else by Mara. He was deluded by Mara. That might be the case, might have been the case, but I doubt that. But he wasn't mindful enough, basically, plain and simple. Because if you have sharp sati, Mara can't hold a candle next to you. There's no way that Mara could convince you, deceive you. So at that point, the Buddha dismisses Venerable Ananda, says, go and sit somewhere else, Ananda, I want to be alone. At that moment, Mara comes and he pushes and pushes. The Buddha says, oh, you promised me years ago when you were about to start to teach that you will enter parinibbana, or full final awakening. You will die, basically, once you have all 4 categories of students. Bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, lay people, both upasakas and upasikas, and the Dhamma is well established. Well, look around you, they're all established in Dhamma. You have all these 8 categories of awakened ones. So when are you going to go? And the Buddha says to Mara, it's okay, relax. You don't have to fret over this. In 3 months' time, I will die because I have already relinquished the will to live on. Now, what happens after that is there's a tremendous earthquake immediately after. Venerable Ananda is sitting there somewhere, and he wakes up from this sit, shaken, because of the intensity of the earthquake. And the Buddha, he comes to the Buddha saying, wow, Bhante, did you feel that? Did you feel that earthquake? And the Buddha says, yes. And he asks, well, what are the causes? And the Buddha lists the causes. But as far as it relates to us and the Dhamma and the Buddha's life specifically, he says, when the Siddhartha, when the Bodhisattva takes residence inside his mother's womb, enters the world, basically, is conceived. When the Buddha is born, when the Buddha, basically, not Buddha yet, obviously, but one of them, basically, obviously, when he teaches the Dhamma, when he awakens the Dhamma, when he awakens to the Dhamma, he becomes a Buddha before that, obviously. And when he relinquishes the life force, the will to live on, the will to survive, fight. And lastly, when the Tathagata dies, there's a tremendous earthquake that happens, shaking the world, where it even affects the heavenly world. Everybody in the 31 realms of existence knows something big is happening. That doesn't happen because of the death of a human, mere human, or even a Brahma God. That happens because of a Tathagata. So all this I'm saying, and much more that I'm not saying here because, time-wise, etc., and because I only know a small portion of the Dhamma. And from what we know, from what we're exposed to, we see how wondrous of a gift, a rarity Tathagata is. The whole existence bows. That's why the Buddha says, when it comes to the Sangha, the qualities of the Sangha, those deserving of veneration. Well, the first is Itipiso Bhagava. The first is the Buddha we venerate. Then there's the Dhamma, then is the Sangha. That Lord Buddha is still in that category because he's a Bhikkhu. He's a noble one. So Tathagata, it's so significant to have the first meal, or depending on how you look at it, with Lady Sujata's meal given to him before awakening, and the last meal given to him, the Tathagata, right, the very last one before he dies. So the Buddha did not put any more food in his mouth, a meal, other than water, until he died in Kusinara. In the sutta, he didn't reach Kusinara yet. But we see it in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. So there's a difference between the Tathagata and everyone else. So I don't know if that was a satisfactory answer, because I don't know of any human who would be able to respond to that the way you might like to be given an answer as far as the Tathagata is concerned, because it's a rarity. That's why we've only had a few. Before I go to Santuti's question, Patachara, your thoughts, how was it? Does this satisfy you?
It does. I just was wondering. I guess the fact that that wasn't shared with the rest of the Sangha, it's understandable why people come to those false conclusions.
Mm.
Mm. But
Yes,
thank you.
of course. And again, it's coming from a place of ignorance, because, and we are highly selective. We see deviousness in that potential, in that possibility, in that other narrative. Well, Chunda must have had a, how could you? So we take something beautiful and we smudge it with our anger and frustration and disappointment, because we live in a fairy tale mindset. Oh, the Buddha was going to live forever. That defeats the whole Dhamma. Anicca, what happened to anicca, impermanence? The Buddha was conditioned, and in his body, he was very much conditioned. He had a body, made of the 4 elements. He did have the 5 aggregates. That's how he was able to communicate. He was telling you, I am feeling thirsty, Ananda. So we don't like that. So we want to deify him, as we've done in some aspects of Buddhism denominations, where they turned it into the Buddha into some deity. And the Hindus later took it and they also added him into the lines of deities, or Vishnu, or some incarnation of that, so that they can get the Buddhist populace to merge in with them. And that's how, one of the ways that they dissolved completely Buddhism in India, because it became part of the, it became part of the Hindu cosmology in a way. Again, all these things deviate us from the fact that there needs to be understanding, and understanding upon information that is valid, that is in the primary sources. And that's what the suttas are. The suttas are primary sources. When using academic language, scholarly language, we have secondary sources, tertiary, etc. Primary sources is what we look at. Commentators, at best, are secondary sources, at best, and that's a stretch. So we have to take it with a bucket of salt sometimes. Yeah, and the Buddha no way would, because he would, even when he was offered robes sometimes. One day, Lady Mahapajapati, Gautami, when she wanted to offer Lord Buddha some robes to his person, just to my Gautama, basically, she was saying. And the Buddha said, no, I can't accept. She became very upset. She became hurt because she thought he was refusing her. And she said, Gautami, you don't understand. This will become far greater in its rewards if you give it to the whole Sangha intentionally. Don't just give it to me, the person you nursed, the baby you nursed and treated me as your son after my mom died, your sister. Don't see me as that person anymore. You need to give this gift to the whole Sangha. Finally, she got it. So similarly with the food, however, in this case, the Buddha made an exception. There was nobody else there when Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha to be, was eating his milk rice. He couldn't even offer it to birds if anything was left in the bowl. That's why when we throw away meal, whatever is left over, we have to throw it in a body of water where there's no fish, a hole in the ground, or if there isn't one, we have to, or a desert area where there's no life there, because of the level of purity of both the donation and the person who's eating it. Otherwise, no one else could be sharing in it, but especially in this case, because it's a gift specially made to Tathagata before his death. Otherwise, you would have a mishmash of things. People would, after that announcement that the Buddha made to Ananda, and then Ananda comes. So what I didn't mention is once he finds out, then he wakes up and says, oh, Bhante, could you please stay for the full extent of your lifespan? Because the Buddha says, I just let go of my life force. I will die in 3 months. And he starts panicking, Ananda. And he says, oh, Bhante, please stay, please stay. And he says, Ananda, I just told you before I dismissed you. But you didn't say anything. 3 times I said it in this setting. But he says, Bhante, it was only once, one setting. No, Ananda, he says. 16 places we have been to, I have repeated it to you, and on every single occasion, 3 times. See? Ananda missed it because he wanted the Buddha to live longer. So, and he begs and begs, and the Buddha says, no, we cannot, Tathagata, when he gives up his life force, he says something, he does not retract it, redact it. Similarly with the food, because there's a bigger picture here. So whatever the Tathagata says, the Buddha says, it cannot be undone. In this example, especially. So I'm going to go to the next question, which Santuti had. Bhante, do the truffles appear through Cunda as a result? Effect of Lord Buddha relinquishing the life force. Truffles appear through Cunda as a result, effect of. No, this was done after. The truffles were eaten first. Oh, I'm sorry. You mean to say the thing that's confusing me is appear. Do the truffles appear through Cunda? Symbolically? It's him wanting to offer the meal and something special. Now, Cunda did not know this was going to be his last meal. Cunda did not know because the Buddha had never told anyone. But from what I recall from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, he had already, I think he had given it up life force at the time. But again, he was already getting old. We need to remember that. He was suffering for years from terrible back pain. But this was physically speaking, he had reached that point where he was failing already. So the meal itself did not cause it. That's another, another way of looking at this incident. The meal itself did not cause the Buddha to have dysentery and bloody diarrhea and start to really weaken. He was already in that state, but he wanted to go out of his way to make it to Cunda's house, to walk there, knowing full well that his body was already failing. So the meal was taken, and then what happened was not as a result of it, even though we like to think of it in A, B, C, and D, etc. It's because of A that B exists. Because of B existing, C is there. No, that doesn't work like that. There's a bigger picture here, like the fact that the Buddha was old and he had already given up his will to live. So remember, when he gave up the will to live, that was for 3 months. So for 3 months, he was still eating. I hope this answers your question. So for 3 months, he didn't go without food for 3 months, remember. After he told Mara, you don't have to worry because the Tathagata has given up, relinquished his will to live, the Buddha was still getting food, was still going from town to town and obtaining his Pindapada. But the very last one before his death was Cunda's. And it didn't appear. And definitely Cunda did not know. He simply knew that he was offering something exquisite and exceptional, unlike any other food that he had offered. He just felt like doing it for the Buddha, his teacher, out of love and appreciation. So the only person who knew was the Buddha himself. Make sense? Good questions. For some reason, I thought today's session would not take so long, but because it's such a human, remember, it's such a human interaction, such a human situation, and important part of this asana, that I totally understand your curiosity as well. If there are any more questions, if none, then let us transfer some merits. Akasatha chabumata devanagama punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasana. Akasatha chabumata devanagama punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desana. Akasatha chabumata devanagama punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mamparanti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May all these Dhamma discourses, explorations of the Buddha word trigger something wondrous in you every moment, where you push through your old conditionings, your own limiting beliefs, perhaps, and see a bigger potential, an awakening, unprecedented transformation taking place within you. With how much work and effort and never before action committed by you taking place, where you challenge your old self, old beliefs, old views and opinions. They are the biggest hurdles we have, not the world, our own beliefs, what we can and can't do. So may you persevere, may you overcome these challenges. May the blessings of the Triple Gem be with you and all your loved ones. Sukyoto.